Welcome, everyone, to That Tracks Podcast, a podcast where we are going to track through our adoptive journey together.
That's good.
Yeah, thanks. This is a special episode. Obviously, it's me and Francie coming at you this week. I alluded to this at the beginning of this month, but I wanted to do a special episode, sort of just going through the adoptive process, like our journey in bringing Eithan into our family. It is National Adoption Month. So we're celebrating that as a family, and today in particular is Ethan's Gotcha Day. So for anybody that doesn't know what Gotcha Day means, it's a day that families celebrate that have adopted a child, and not all families that have adopted celebrate this day. But it's a day where we celebrate the day that Eithan joined our family, and so for us that looks kind of different, and we'll get into that a little bit in this episode. But there's the day that Eithan came home with us, and by home I mean our apartment in Colombia. And then there's the day that he legally became a part of our family. And so some families celebrate that legal day, some families celebrate the day that he physically was with us. We choose to celebrate the day that he physically was with us because the weeks leading up to the day that he legally became a part of our family, we put in the work.
Well, yeah, I mean, we started parenting the day he came home,
right,
so that's big.
So we're going to get into that, but today we're celebrating that, and we are actually going to be headed to the Magic Kingdom in just not very long. So we don't have a ton of time with you guys today, but that's okay. I feel like we will be able to get into the journey and kind of go over everything with you guys, but we also want to spend some time celebrating today as a family. So, and we're going to do that by celebrating Eithan, but also we have multiple celebrations happening. We have Friendsgiving going on, and then also we have a tradition in our house where we take the boys to Magic Kingdom to Ye Old Christmas Shop, and there's letters there that you can write to Santa, and then there's a mailbox that you can put the letters in that the letters are then sent to the North Pole, and so we are going to go write our letters to Santa today.
Big deal today.
Yeah. We also Santa really needs to know what the boys want for Christmas, if you know what I mean. So, but anyways, so the adoptive journey, we put a question box on our Instagram story asking you guys if you had any specific questions, and we'll use those questions to guide this conversation. But I think that the adoptive journey for us started before Francie and I even knew each other. Adoption was something that was on our hearts from a very young age. And so I'll share my side of that, and then Francie can speak to it as well with her journey. But my aunt adopted my cousin from Russia when I was a kid. I was I think I was 11 or 12 at the time, and I'll never forget the excitement of that journey. I wrote her an email while she was in Russia asking if I could be the first person to hold my cousin when they got back to the airport. Watching her go through that journey, it created a passion for adoption in me from a very young age. I've always had parental instincts. I've always wanted to be a dad. I've always been so excited for that. I am, I don't know if I consider myself a nurturing person. Yeah, somewhat. So I've always had that in me, and I could not wait. I could not wait to one day adopt for myself, and I didn't know what that was going to look like, obviously, and where that journey would take me. But it was always something that I had always talked about. I always talked about one day when I get married, I want to adopt, and so that passion for adoption was instilled on me at a very young age. And then it was a conversation that Francie and I both had while we were dating in college as well. So Francie also had an experience with adoption.
So when I was in third grade, my parents got legal guardianship of my cousin, who was in sixth grade at the time. And so she lived with us until we all graduated high school, and we still do. We're gonna all be together for Thanksgiving this year. So it's we're sister cousins is what we call each other. So it was a really cool experience to be part of that in my own house, which just introduced me in third grade to kind of what that means to reach out and to provide a home for somebody that may not have, what they need. And then actually after I graduated with my master's degree. I was an adoption specialist for a while. And so I worked with birth mothers and adoptive families, and I would counsel the birth moms, help them make an adoption plan, and then match them with their families and do the hospital thing with them, like all the whole 9 yards. And so I was able to really learn the adoption process at that point, which was really cool. The best thing besides parenting that I've ever done. So, that helped us a lot.
For sure. And when Francie and I met in college, we, like, once the conversation went from, like, Francie and I were actually really good friends before we started dating. We were, like, we had to take the leap of faith out of the friend zone, for sure.
You had to take the leap.
Sure. Yeah, which we've talked about on the podcast before. But we were really close, and, again, adoption was still, like, very much a part of the conversation.
Well, I mean, like, before we were even dating, we were friends, and we had been on trips where we were serving children, and so it was just, like, a natural conversation.
Yeah, and so we both knew that, both of us wanted to adopt one day, and so that was a very, like, natural and easy, like, conversation to have between the two of us while we were dating in college, saying, like, one day when we get married and we have kids, like, we want, like, one or more of those children to join our family via the adoptive process. And so it was a very, like, natural and easy, like, thing to talk about. And I also want to speak to that because I know that there's a lot of families where one of the partners may want to adopt and the other partner may not be as into it. And I have so much empathy for that. Like, I feel so blessed and thankful that that was something that we both were in agreement on, for sure. But growing your family and having conversations about how and when to grow your family it's not a, like, it's a very personal thing to talk about. And you know, having those conversations with your partner, like, I think, like, authenticity and realness are the only things that you can communicate when you're having those conversations. Because it's, I mean, thankfully we were on the same page. But even, and we'll get to this, but even when we got to the point where we were ready to start talking about, is now the time for us to adopt, was a very sensitive conversation as well.
Well, and something that I would always talk to my adoptive families about when I was counseling them was making sure that obviously they're both on the same page and both parties do want to move forward with the adoption. Like, that's the biggest thing, that you're on the same page. But having a really open conversation about, like, what are our fears with adopting a child that is not biologically ours? What are some of the things that we foresee being issues for us? And having those really candid conversations and not being judgmental in those conversations is so important. Because you can't enter into that process, like, hiding things from each other. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, in like marriage advice 101 from Nick and Francie, but communication is key, for sure, with any conversations, but specifically about adoption. And you know, I think, like, I had a thought and I just lost it.
That's where we are today.
That's
guys.
How my brain's been lately. But
I'm sure it was great.
It was a good one too. Yeah, I don't know if I'll go back there, but it's true. Like thinking about judgment. You talked about judgment. I really do think that stop. I really do think that, like, going into the adoptive process with, like, a judgment-free zone is critical, because there are a lot of fears that you'll have. There's fears that we still have about Eithan and how he blends into our family. There's fears that parents in general have fears. Parenting in general, whether you're parenting a biological or adopted child, is terrifying. Like, there are so many components to it, but there really are specific fears in parenting a child that you have adopted into your family. And, you know, I do want to, like, stress and like, drive that point home, that it's okay to feel those fears, for sure. Like, it's okay to wonder what it's going to be like to adopt a child and what it's going to be like to parent an adopted child, because we had those fears, just like we had fears about what is parenting going to look like for us when Luke was, you know, coming into this world, for sure. But just like it, but also very different. Like
Yeah.
like it is so important to look at it as a matter of fact thing. You're bringing a child into your home that is not biologically yours. That has, like, whether you're, obviously there's scenarios where you're adopting, and like Francie facilitated these adoptions where baby was literally taken from the delivery room into, to the adoptive parent's arms. Obviously there's less opportunity for trauma there, but the reality is that there's still, like,
Well, adoption is trauma.
right,
regardless.
there's still trauma going to be associated with that. At the end of the day, like, Eithan will always have the idea that there are biological parents of his out there that Luke will never have to experience. Luke knows that his biological parents have been with him since he was in utero, whereas Eithan will have those questions, and will have those heavy conversations as he gets older and is able to process things more. Not that we hide anything about that. Like, we are very open and honest about adoption. But obviously, like, there's degrees into like where
well,
we
there's a
carry this
level of,
conversation.
like, we have to protect his heart,
Right.
and knowing, like, where he is in his understanding, having really age appropriate conversations honestly,
Right.
like, that's, you have to find that line,
Right. But
well, and I was gonna say this too, just about, like, being scared and not knowing what to expect, and just parenting being terrifying. But just because it's scary to adopt doesn't mean it's wrong
Right.
for you. Like,
right.
we were terrified.
Correct.
And it's one of the best things we've ever done.
And if it's something that's on your heart and you have a passion for, then I do think it's important to really, like, have conversations with your partner to explore that passion. Because on the opposite side of that, I think that, like, adoption is, like, it's almost like a trendy thing. I don't want to say trendy, but maybe it's almost like there's, like, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but, like, there's, like, this, like, it's like this cool thing to do.
Well, there's a little bit of a savior mentality that goes into
Correct.
it, I think.
And you cannot go into the adoptive process with that mindset either.
No.
Like, you have to look at it for what it is. You are bringing a child into your home that is going to have trauma, that is going to have, like, serious questions about, like, love and, like,
belonging and
right. And so it is not for everyone. The adoptive process is not for everyone, and I it breaks my heart watching families walk through the process when they think it's for them, and then they get to a point in the process where they realize that it's not. But it's also so important for them to get to that point before the child enters into their home.
Yeah, for sure.
So, we say all of this to say, like, I mean, I have family members that are like, yeah, no, I don't think we can ever do that. And that's so healthy. It is so healthy to have realistic expectations about what you can handle inside of your home. Because it's real. And we don't say these things to, like, like, one day with Eithan, I'm not saying these things so that he looks back and he's like, man, like, it was hard. Yeah, it was hard to adopt Eithan. Just like it's hard to parent Luke.
Yes.
Like, the parenting is hard.
It's
period.
hard. It's just hard in different ways.
Correct. And we would obviously never say those things to, like, make him feel bad, but we also will be realistic with him and say, like, buddy, like, look how powerful love is. Look how powerful love is, that, like, we have loved you since you have, like, entered into our family. Because I do think there was this little bit of, like, instantaneous, like, oh, that's our kid now. Like, that's our child, that's our son. And there is a love that you, like, turn on, but it turns on differently than it does when you are parenting a biological child.
Well, and I kind of compare it to, like, I've heard a lot of times, and I don't know that you really experience this, but I've heard a lot of times when women are pregnant, they feel like an instant bond to that child because they're physically connected. And then sometimes dads don't feel that until, like, months after the kid is born. And that's normal. It's okay. It's just a different bonding experience. So I think that it's similar in that biological children and adopted children, you bond differently. They're strangers.
Yeah. I think, like, it's hard for me because I've always had that, like parental instinct, because I've always wanted to be a dad for so long. So it didn't take very long for me to bond to Luke when we discovered that Francie was pregnant with him. But it did. It was to be very real. When Eithan joined our family, and we're going to actually get into the process, but when Eithan joined our family, it was like, it was strange at first. It was different. It was bringing this child into your life he was 3 years old and had 3 years of life experience before he came into our home. And so, like, very real things like changing diapers and like all of these things that like we had not, comforting him when he was crying. He attached to Francie a lot faster than he attached to me because of his experience with male figures versus female figures. And so it was different. It was hard. It was challenging to bond with him a little bit at first. I mean, he was never like scared. He was never didn't express a whole lot of fear with us, but it still was like, this is different,
well, we are trying to figure him out as much as he was trying to figure us
Correct.
out. Like, we're all bringing so much into the situation, and having 3 years of life experience before these strangers are introduced to his life, like, that's a weird thing for even a 3-year-old to go through. So it was never bad. It was just super different.
Yeah. And I mean, it was hard too, for sure. And hard is not bad. It's just hard. But the like, there were moments too where it was like, I wanted to add this as well. And I know this is one of the questions that you guys asked. Like, did we know that Eithan was neurodivergent before we adopted him? And the answer to that is yes. But like with any child on the spectrum, you have no idea what that means for him. And so, and this is where we can get into the process more, but like our experience with Eithan before he like actually came home with us was just like, we would FaceTime him like for maybe 15 minutes.
It depends on how long he tolerated being on FaceTime.
Right. And so like, we didn't know, we also, we have a neurotypical child in Luke. And so like, we didn't know what parenting a neurodivergent child looked like. We didn't know what parenting a child with autism was going to be like for our family. And so like, you can try to prep for that as much as you possibly can, but there's no way to fully prepare for it because every child who is on the spectrum is different.
It's a spectrum for a reason.
And so, yes, we knew. There were questions about that diagnosis because he had received it when he was like 1.5. And so it felt a little early for him to have received it. And so, there was a lot of like speculation as to what that meant.
Well, and just like interventions and resources and tools and understanding was so different in Colombia versus here in the States. So it's like, we're not sure where like their understanding of the spectrum is compared to ours and what that,
and especially for
like.
His case in particular,
like
they're like, because of like his particular access to medical care, it was very different than what like we were going to be able to provide for him when he got to the United States. So
we should just jump into it.
Yeah, so like correct. So adoption process started when we were very young because we developed a passion for adoption, and that is definitely part of the journey. Where it went from there was we dated in college, got married we both had finished our master's degrees, and we got pregnant 2 years after we got married. Less than 2 years, because we knew that we wanted to have kids pretty quickly. Like, we were ready to be parents. We wanted to have a little bit of like married time, but then we were ready, like going, after we had been married for 2 years, we anticipated like wanting to have kids, and it worked out. Luke was born 2 months after our 2-year wedding anniversary. We also had said that we wanted to travel out of the country together before we had kids, which we were able to do. We actually went on a missions trip through our church to Colombia, and stayed at an orphanage in Colombia, a totally different part of the country than where Eithan is from. And obviously this was way before Eithan had come into this world, but that's pretty cool little detail to the story for sure. But then that also just kind of further developed our passion for, loving on these kiddos and wanting to adopt for ourselves in the future. And so Luke was born in 2016, and we were blessed with a wonderful, healthy little baby boy, and he changed our worlds forever, for sure, in terms of becoming parents for the first time. And then we got pregnant in 2018. We moved back to Central Florida in 2018, and that was like a really rough couple of months for us. Very stressful, a lot of things happening. We ended up miscarrying in April of 2018, which shattered our world. It broke our hearts, for sure. Like, that's a whole other conversation for another day, and I know I've talked about it some on the podcast, but like, yeah, it wrecked us. period. Point blank, it wrecked us for two people who have just like a heart for parenting, and immediately we're so excited about the idea of growing our family again. It really destroyed us, and so we continued to try to have a baby, and we were just unsuccessful in getting pregnant for it was like 2 years after,
because we got to 2020,
because 2020 happened, and we all know what that meant in 2020. But March and April of 2020, I think like we had been trying for 2 years at that point, and we had been like, unsuccessful in trying to get pregnant, and we had always talked about adoption. And like, I want to be clear about this because this is an interesting like point to navigate. Adopting is not, and probably should not be, a replacement for wanting to have biological children.
Yes, 100%.
Because it's because like we've talked about, it's such a different process, and it's a different way of growing your family, that it's not a like, okay, well, this doesn't work, so let's do this, and like cut and dry.
I just feel like if you are using adoption, and I know that this is not, I can't make a blanket statement about this, but when I have experienced it and working and seeing it firsthand, when you're stepping into adoption as a replacement for having biological children, there's a lot of trauma and heartbreak that you're bringing into the situation, that the adopted kid doesn't need to have that associated with them. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, totally, because realistically, like, you cannot replace the heartache and the longing for wanting to have a biological child with an adopted child. An adopted child can fill holes in your heart that you never knew existed.
Yes.
For sure. And like, they can fill your heart with so much love and so much compassion. But
you are still getting to step into parenting.
Correct. But
which is wonderful.
It's just important to be clear with yourself and with your partner that like, you are not choosing to adopt because you can't get pregnant. And I think a lot of times people do that. Like, a lot of times people who are struggling with infertility say, well, that's fine, like, let's just adopt then. And in a lot of scenarios, it works out.
Yeah.
Because you just cannot wait to be a parent. And that's what it boils down to for you. It's like your passion for parenting there, like, supersedes whether that child is biologically yours or joins your family through adoption.
Yeah, I think bottom line is that, like, what it could look like is you adopt this child no matter their age, and you are putting a lot of expectation on them.
Correct.
To meet your expectations of a biological child, and that's not fair to the kid.
Correct.
So it's okay to adopt, obviously. I mean, do you, if you have not been able to get pregnant, but to put unrealistic expectations on the kid. Yeah. I don't know. It just is like
it's important to talk about that. It's important to have those conversations. Like, our agency basically worked like a therapist from time to time, and it's essentially your social worker who's like going through the process with you will almost end up like be like a therapist for you. But it's important to have those conversations with them for sure. So I say all that to say 2020 happened. We got to a point in March and April where we were just spending so much time around each other, time together as a family. And I started to feel like this tug on my heart where I was like, okay, we've been unsuccessful in getting pregnant, and we both really want to grow our family. We've talked about adoption for a long time, and we got, and this is where this is just real, but this is where my faith comes into play too. I was just very much like, God, you've put this passion on my heart to adopt, and you've instilled this in us. Like, it just felt like this tug on my heart saying like, hey, what are you waiting for? Like, why are you not stepping into this yet? And so I was feeling that way without having talked to Francie about it at all. And to be honest, I was really terrified of having that conversation with her, because both of us had been trying for 2 years at that point to, grow our family biologically. And I was nervous. I was nervous that she was going to be disappointed, or that she was going to feel like guilty for the fact that we had not like, there's infertility is a whole other separate conversation, but there's a lot of emotion that's wrapped up into that. And so I felt that tug enough to be like, Francie, let's talk about this. And I don't remember exactly when it happened, but I just was like, hey, like, why don't we adopt? And Francie was like, I've been feeling that way as well.
Yeah, I had been thinking it too. And I think that while 2020 was terrible, what it did give our family time to do was to just like be still
Yeah.
and quiet, and it quieted down a lot of the noise and busyness of life, and it let, I would say, both of us have time personally to start really thinking about that and letting it grow in our hearts and in our minds,
and like confirm that was the time that we should step into
because
that.
we both had been thinking it and didn't know.
So we did. So May of 2020, we Googled. And some of you guys asked this question, like, a lot of you asked, why did we choose Colombia? Why did we choose international adoption? My mom is Cuban, and so I grew up in a, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Multicultural home. My mom is, we celebrated a lot of Latin American traditions for sure in my household. And we also were just like, it was the combination of different cultures coming together that was celebrated in my house growing up. And so I love Latin culture. I love Latin America. I've been to El Salvador. I've been to Costa Rica. We've been to Colombia twice together. And every time that I have visited Latin America, I fall in love with the people there and the culture there even more. Obviously, there are subcultures within that for sure. But Latin culture is just something that's very important and special to me. And so I knew that I wanted to adopt from Latin America. And like Francie was totally on board with that as well. We also leaned towards international adoption. To be honest, I think we wanted to travel, bring home the child, and then just like exist in our lives together as a family.
Well, and I think that's where adoption, like domestic adoption and international adoption, are so different. Domestic adoption within the United States, you bring the child home, and then you have a period of time. It could be 3 months, I think is usually the shortest amount of time, to years that you have that child in your home, but they're not legally part of your family yet. Just because of if you're adopting through the state or if it's private, there's just a series of like homes visits you have to go through. Anyway, it's just a long process once you're home. Right. And in international adoption, we do all of that stuff at the beginning, and then once we have the kids file and we travel down there, the adoption's finalized in country, and when we come home to the States, it's done. I mean, we still have visits with our social worker, but legally everything's done. And
like domestic adoption, like, so adoption within the United States looks so different depending on the state that you're in and depending on the program that you're going through. It's more convoluted, I would say. Whereas, I mean, all of it is complicated, but I would say it's more convoluted than an international adoption in some ways, in that the process looks so different with, birth parents being in the States. Whereas Eithan was in a foster home and then moved to an orphanage, and we never had any sort of contact with biological parents whatsoever. And so, that's just one of the things that, like, based on the trauma that our family had experienced with the miscarriage, we were looking for a way to just really, like, I want to say simplify the process, even though there is no simple way to adopt a child, which is, in some ways, it's good. Like, it's important that, like, you have to jump through hoops in order to bring a child home into your family. It should not just be, like, simple and easy. We can get into that conversation. It should be a little bit more simplified, I think. Or access to resources should be a lot easier for sure. But yeah, so we chose that. That's what led us to choose international adoption. The majority of it was my passion for Latin culture and wanting to adopt a Latin child in order to also continue to, like, celebrate that culture inside of our household.
Well, and I think we should speak to the fact that, like, because Nick has had that culture in his life since he was a baby, and because he's able to speak Spanish and I can speak a little bit, we knew that we were capable of adopting an international child from a Latin American country, where some people would feel more comfortable, like, doing it in the States, and I think that is wonderful. But because we knew that we were capable of that and had already had some of these traditions in our home, like, the transition for that child we knew could have been a little bit easier because we had experience with that.
Yeah, and I think traveling to Colombia together on a mission trip, staying in an orphanage, had a lot to do with that as well. So
Years before.
But Colombia was not like the country that we had decided on. We just knew Latin America, so that's what we Googled. Adoption agencies that work in Latin America.
And then we found an agency that is actually based in Birmingham, Alabama, and it turned out that they had a social worker that worked remote like 30 minutes from our house.
Right.
So we were like, oh,
this
that's
all works
amazing.
out well. And Francie had actually heard of this agency, and for the purpose of like privacy, we're not going to go into like details on all of that, but Francie had exposure to this agency when she worked for the adoption agency that she worked for as well. So it worked out. We literally filled out an application with the agency, and in that application you put like the age of the child that you're wanting to adopt. You put like if there's a preference on gender, which at the time we had no preference on gender. We did have a preference on the age. We wanted to adopt a child that was younger than Luke. Luke was, how old was Luke at the time? 5.
Yeah, he was in kindergarten.
Yeah, so Luke was 5 years old at the time, and we knew we wanted to adopt a child that was younger than Luke. Birth order was something for us to keep and to protect. And, that's not the same for every family, and that's totally okay. Like, it works out for sure. But for us, that's something that we wanted to pay attention to. What that means is we wanted Luke to like, remain the oldest. We knew that it was going to be an adjustment for him, for sure. And so, like, that was going to be a way for him to help with that adjustment, is that he was going to be big brother. And so we filled all of that information out. They like follow up with a form where you just get into like the nitty gritty of like what are like health concerns that you.
I'm saying like, it felt like 6 pages
Truly.
Of so many like diseases and health issues and mental health things, like all kinds of things that I had to Google like half of them because I didn't even know what they were. And it was like, how willing are you to accept these things? And I'm gonna be honest, it almost made me feel dirty to say like, nope, can't do that one, no. But I think that's where like communication comes in. It was like, Google this, what are the symptoms, what's like prognosis and lifespan and all the things, and like what do we feel like we are capable of doing, even down to like, we have stairs in our home, will it be impossible for a child who has this to get around in our home, and things like that. And there was a lot of
it's
conversations.
Hard for sure. And I think there's like a guilt that can be associated with it when you're saying no to certain things, but you have to say no to certain things depending on like what your family is capable of or what you as parents are capable of. And there were things that we felt like we were not going to be able to like handle appropriately in terms of like providing for that child what they would need. And so we went through that process, filled everything out, and then like that's when Paperwork Central begins. Like you have to do a home visit or a home study, which takes like multiple visits to your home from a social worker. They are literally like finding out everything about you. They're looking at your financial picture. They're looking at your
family relationships with everybody.
Your parents, your siblings.
Who would be the caregivers if something were to happen to us?
Right.
And all like
we had to write like a biography of ourselves, and it ended up being multiple pages for each of us, where we were just like talking about like what our childhood looked like, what our young adulthood looked like, all of those things, what our marriage looks like. We had to take quizzes on our marriage, and obviously this is like particular to our specific adoption agency, but overall in general, like a lot common. Of these things are common in home studies. We had to take quizzes without like looking at them together. We had to take quizzes to assess our marriage, which was terrifying. We were like getting graded on how good our
flying colors.
We did. But it was weird. It was weird getting graded on like
we had to do psychological evaluations like individually
with like a psychologist.
And technically speaking, I guess the whole first half of the process was purely the United States adoption process. Correct. It was getting all the paperwork done for the states and what the states needed, sending things to our government, and nothing international was happening at this point. Right. Once that process was done and our home study was approved and all of that,
and we were like powering through it. Like your home study will go as long as you let it go, because there's there's just so much to do for it, but we were doing our best to really like get through it.
We were making appointments left and right, like physicals with doctors and the psychological evals and all the things. We were just trying to knock them out. Where if you are, I don't want to say dragging your feet, but like if you are wanting to
not as in a hurry.
No, yeah, if you're not in a hurry, then you can make that process last longer to give yourself more time.
Yeah. That's very much part of my personality too, though, where I'm just like, if I want something, I want it.
Just get it done.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna get it done. So we powered through the home study process, and our social worker was absolutely incredible. She's phenomenal.
Yeah, we love her.
But we got through that process. Oh, and the other thing that was happening while we were doing that was we were fundraising as well, because adoption in general is very expensive. International adoption in particular is expensive because you have not just the fees that are associated with actually adopting the child, but then like you're paying for things like in-country and travel and all of those things as well. So there's a lot of fundraising that needed to be done because we didn't have that. You know, like we were relying on family, we were relying on friends, and we were relying on...
And I think that's one of the coolest things about it too, is that we saw so many friends and people that I hadn't even spoken to since we were in high school together stepped up and like gave towards our adoption. And it was really cool to see so many people kind of rally behind that.
It was very special.
Yeah, it made us feel very loved.
Yeah.
So
it's
cool.
The home study process took about a year. We finished that in May of, getting closer to May of 2021.
Yeah.
And so like the United States side of things was finished, and then we had also, I think like March, April, we had started the process of finishing the paperwork that we needed to finish with Colombia. The reason that Colombia ended up being the country that we started working with, and that was decided like right out the gate based on like our like preferences for the child that we wanted to adopt.
Well, our agency basically was like, okay, so you want to adopt from Latin America. Here are all the countries that we have a relationship with, and we have social workers in these countries. Based on your age preferences, because a lot of the other Latin American countries were only adopting like teenagers. Our best option was either Colombia or the DR, right?
Costa Rica, I think, was the other one. I think so. Because the Dominican Republic was...
That's what it was.
Yeah, the Dominican Republic, you had to live in the Dominican Republic for 6 months before you could adopt the child. And obviously, like, that wasn't going to work for us. We both had full-time jobs. And
Luke was in school.
Had a little boy in kindergarten. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it was between Colombia and Costa Rica, but I think like our agency in particular worked a lot with Colombia. And so they were like this is the country that we think that we should like work with for you guys for like when we get to the point where we're starting to review files of children. But you have to get to that, you have to make that decision on the country even before then, because you've got to start the paperwork with that country,
that specific country,
in order to even be considered to be able to adopt from that country. And so we got there April, May, we started finishing the paperwork for Colombia. I think by May of 2020, all of our paperwork...
2021.
I'm sorry, yeah. May of 2020 is when we started. May of 2021, all of our paperwork was finished.
We had sent, it's called a dossier, to Colombia, and that was all of our paperwork that the government says, okay, yes, we can proceed with the adoption.
Right. Or we can proceed with starting to match this family with...
this family can review files of kids that are in our country.
Correct.
Basically is what they approved.
We had to get the approval from Colombia that it was okay for us to adopt from Colombia. And so we did in May of 2020, we started reviewing files. We got our first file sent to us. Actually, I think it was in April of 2020, 2021, we got our first file sent to us, and it was of a little girl. And she had a lot of health needs. And some of those needs were health needs that we had said no to in like our paperwork. But the adoption agency just brought it to us, and they were like, hey, like, this is a scenario where this little girl needs a home. Is this something that you would consider? And it was absolutely heartbreaking and filled with a lot of guilt that we turned that file down. Because again, it went back to like what we felt like as a family, realistically, how we could take care of a child with like the amount of like physical needs that she was going to have. One of them being stairs. Like I don't remember her specific diagnosis, but I know that stairs were going to be something that was going to be a challenge for her. and like
her bedroom was going to be upstairs. Like, it just, there was some logistical things. And I think that that's where, again, open and honest communication with each other was key.
Yeah.
Because we had to say, originally, we said no to this because of these reasons. And we're seeing that with this child. And as much as we want to step in and save her, we are not her savior. And we can't be that for her. And so it was not fair to her for us to take her. We did find out that, like, not long after we passed on her file that she was adopted. So we were thrilled to hear that.
Yeah. But it was I share that
tough.
because it's a real part of the journey, is that you may get a file that you say, and you also don't have to say yes to the first file either. You're so excited to finally get your first file that you're like, oh my gosh, like, and you see a picture, you see all of those things, and it's heartbreaking to say no.
We got videos of her, like all kinds of things. And, well, yeah.
It's heartbreaking to say no, but it's also, you have to be realistic because, like, we flash forward a little bit. When we were in country, we were at a resort while we were waiting by the courthouse for, like, finalization to take place with the courthouse. And there was another family there that had a child that they were in this period of time where they were, like, navigating, like, they were getting close to finalization as well. And they ended up pulling because that child was having a lot of, like, behavioral complications and was not blending well with their family.
Well, there were a lot more needs there than I think they had originally realized, and it became too much.
Yeah. And so they ended up going home and deciding that, like, that was not going to be the time for them. And that is absolutely heartbreaking. And I cannot imagine being in that scenario, in that situation. They had other kids there with them. And a lot of people may look at that and be like, oh, how self-centered or whatever. No, that is, like, so brave and honest and realistic for them to realize that, like, if it's not working here in these couple of weeks and, like, this is just not going the way that they felt like it needed to go for their family, do not bring that home. Like, do not bring that. That is a disservice to your family, yes, but it's a disservice to, like, that child in particular. Like,
there is a family that is equipped for that child.
Correct.
And if the family is not you, it's okay.
It's okay. Yeah. And you don't have to feel like this. I mean, you're going to feel guilt for sure, but you don't have to let that guilt propel you to make decisions that should not be made.
Yeah.
And so anyways, so in May, so after we reviewed that file for, that sweet little girl, and turned it down, our agency went back to, like, looking at different files for us. Eventually they did find Ethan's file. So Eithan was the second file that we received. We got a picture of him, we got videos of him, and we had real conversations about his diagnosis of having autism.
Well, and what's interesting, and actually I didn't even remember this until now, but they also told us that within a few weeks they were actually going to lose his file, and it was going to go back to, like, the Colombian government and wouldn't be with our agency.
Right.
So if we wanted to make this decision, it had to be relatively quickly.
They weren't doing that to pressure us, but they were just being realistic and saying, like, hey, like,
because we told them we were thinking about it, and they're like, okay, well, since you're thinking about it, you need to know that we have a timeline, whatever you decide.
It didn't take us very long to say yes to Ethan's file. Like, I remember we got it on Cinco de Mayo. We got it on May 5th. I was at work, and Francie and I, like, were giddy reviewing the file, and not long after that, we were like, yeah, like, this is the little boy for us. And so we then, like, put in the request basically to match with him, and that goes through the Colombian government. And then we had to wait until, I think it was August.
It was a while.
Yeah, this happened at the end of May. We said, like, yes. And then it wasn't until August that we officially matched with Eithan. And what that means is that, like on paper, like, Eithan was going to, the adoptive process was going to not process. How do I word this?
Well, essentially what it meant was our agency got to keep his file, and the file, that means all of his medical records, his family records with things redacted, obviously, situational things that were going on with him. Our agency got to keep that. We got to match with him, which meant no other family was going to be able to come in and, like, take him.
Right. And
for lack of better words.
Yeah, like, we were, like, on deck to be Ethan's parents.
Yeah.
I guess is a weird way of phrasing that, but like I don't know how else to describe it. And so in August we officially matched with him, and that's when we told Luke. We had waited. Luke knew that we were adopting. Luke knew that like our family was going to grow via adoption, via international adoption. He knew that we were going to travel to Colombia. I mean, he had no idea what that really meant. But like it was a very open and honest conversation with him from the beginning. He was a part of that with us,
and was very excited about it
for sure. And so we surprised Luke at Disney and showed him a picture of Ethan in front of the castle, had a fun little photo shoot moment, and said like, that's your little brother, you're going to be his big brother. We waited until that match was official though, because we did not want to get Luke all excited and then something happened and the file like fall through. Because that happens, and it can happen, and it's absolutely tragic that it happens to families. But so in August we did that, and then it was time to start like travel plans. And so we booked flights, we started making reservations at like apartment complexes, all of the things. And also during that time, Ethan had been in a foster home for the first 3 years of his life. And during that time, they moved him from the foster home to an orphanage. They wanted to be very intentional about like giving us the best opportunity to bond with him as possible.
They didn't want us to come in and be the people that were taking him from this home that he'd been in for 3 years, and for us to be the villain, which there's a lot to be said about that.
Sure. We have like our own opinions on it, for sure.
But I do think that for bonding purposes, it probably was best that that was not the situation we were walking into. I just don't think there's a good situation for us to walk into.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's loss and trauma for that child. That's important to realize, is that when you are an adoptive parent and you're bringing, especially a child who's older, and you're bringing that child into your home, that's creating trauma for them. Like you are taking that child into your home and saying, I'm your parent now, and no child who's had a few years in their life is going to look at you. I mean, they will warm up to you for sure, and Ethan did, but there's going to be moments there where it's like, excuse you, whether they have the way to verbalize that or not. And Ethan didn't have the words to use for that, but he had actions for that, for sure, where he would just like, he would have a meltdown and just fall to the ground and would not get up for us. He would
like in the middle of the street. We're just like, what?
And he was like, he liked routine. He liked he liked for us to have a routine as much as possible, and we tried to integrate that as much as possible. But there was also just so much happening while we were in country, and so there'd be moments where he'd want to like go down a certain path, and we'd change it up and go down a different path, and he would just fall. And so like, you know, it's hard. It's very hard. It is heartbreaking and heart fulfilling at the same time. So we got all of our travel plans.
And at the same time, he had been moved, but we also had started, was it like weekly or I think it was weekly FaceTimes with him. Like the social worker or psychologist at the orphanage would call us, and we would talk with him. That looked like Ethan walking around and doing whatever he wanted while we were like, hey buddy, like it's so weird.
He didn't know who we were and didn't have an interest in speaking to us. And really didn't even fully grasp the concept of like, these are your mom and your dad. You know, he was like, he wasn't there cognitively just yet. And so we also, it was during COVID, and so like COVID had hit Colombia pretty hard. And like there were certain things that were like very real and very intense at the orphanage, for sure, in terms of like protocol that they had. And so there was just a lot that was contributing to like Ethan's experience that was really hard for him and challenging for him, for sure. But so from August to when we traveled in November, it was all just prep and planning and getting ready, literally like decorating the house for Christmas, so that when we got back, we knew we were going to be down there for about a month when we got back from Colombia, that like it was going to be full-fledged Christmas mode. So we wanted to have that ready to go. And then it was really cool because our moms got to travel with us, which was very special. So they traveled down with us and they were there with us for the first week that we were down there, which was huge also for Luke. Those are two of his favorite people in the world. And so to be able to like have them there to support us, but in like specifically to support us by like occupying Luke as soon as like Ethan joined the family. And just giving
him like special one-on-one attention while our attention was focused on Ethan, so that Luke wasn't feeling left out and resentful, was huge.
Just in general, having them there was critical. And then also like my mom is fully bilingual. Spanish was her first language. So to have my mom there too was like huge because she helped a lot in terms of like communication. I can speak a lot of Spanish and I can understand it better than I can speak it. But like my mom, like it's like, I don't even want to say second nature. It's like first nature to her because that was her first language, where like that was critical, especially those first couple weeks navigating like, is this the apartment that we want to be in while we're here, or like figuring out like
Spoiler alert, it
wasn't. We changed apartments. But like also figuring out like what are the good areas of town, where should we be, where should we not be, those types of things. So we were in Bogota, which is a massive city in Colombia. And so there are so many details about like the actual time in Bogota that we could get into, and like I hate to cut you all as the listeners short on this, but we won't get into all of that, and maybe we'll record like a special Patreon episode to talk about like in-country experience more in depth. But we are running out of time. We've got to get to Magic Kingdom. But so just to say, in country, it was a beautiful, tragic, exhausting, stressful, rewarding experience.
Yeah.
Like all of the feelings, all of the emotions. Like I said, we were down there for a month. We got down there on the 15th of November. I think it was the evening of the 14th. The 15th, we had a day to like acclimate ourselves. We switched apartments that day, figured out like where do we need to go to get groceries, where do we need to like where are places to go out to eat or to go shop, or like if we need diapers, where can we go get those, that type of stuff. And then the 16th, this is how it works in Colombia. The 16th, we met Eithan.
Just us.
Just me and Francie went to the orphanage and met him with the social worker that worked at the orphanage. And that went well, but it was not like this intense moment of like him running into our arms
or anything. It was just kind of like, hey.
No, he just kind of was like, yeah, you can exist there, but I don't really want anything to do with you.
Yeah, he just played like on the playground, and we were just kind of like, yeah,
trying to like talk to him. But Eithan was essentially nonverbal at that time, so he wasn't like talking back to us, and didn't really have much of an interest in us. He was more comfortable obviously with the social worker that he had been around for a few months, and so it was more just us getting to like have some contact with him for the first time. And then the next day we went back to the orphanage, and this time we took Luke with us. So it was the three of us, and went to the orphanage, and that was the day that like we got to bring him back to our apartment with us, which was 3 years ago to the day.
Yeah. Which was interesting too, because they had prepped us that with all of their transitions and his autism diagnosis and all that, they were preparing us for like meltdown central when we tried to get him in the van to go to the apartment, and just were really like, I mean, they were nervous, which made us nervous, obviously. Yeah. But we let him play, and Luke played, and they ran around on the playground for a while. And then there's like, it's kind of ceremonious, kind of, with like how they do it. And they take us to a room, and there's all these things. We do a little walk around with him. But then it was time to get in the van to go to the apartment, and the four of us got in the van, and he was just like, all right, let's go.
Yeah, he was like, so chill.
And they're all like,
fell asleep on Francie's lap. Like,
yeah, he was sitting on my lap and just put his head on my chest and knocked out the entire trip to the apartment. Yeah,
I mean, it was so peaceful, which was huge. Like, that's something that we had truly been praying for, that day was peaceful, because not only did we want it to be peaceful for him, we also wanted it to be peaceful for Luke. Luke was only 5 at the time, and so we knew it was going to be a challenge for Luke to fully understand, like, wait a second, this is my little brother now, and he's screaming his head off, and he doesn't want to be with us, so why is he with us? Like, we didn't want to have to navigate all of those things, and sometimes you do. Like, it's a realistic thing that you'll have to go through. But Luke didn't. It was just very, very peaceful. Not that, like, Eithan had a lot of an interest in Luke at that time, because he didn't really. Like, there was a period where it was just kind of like they did their own thing.
Yeah, they just kind of coexisted together, which honestly was probably better, because they got their own space and toys and all the things.
And Luke was starting to struggle towards the end of our time in Colombia, where he missed his room, and he missed his toys, and he missed like
his friends at school, and
just like the normal things of life. And we got to that point too. Yeah. We were just so done with being in country. We were so ready to be home. And
and feeling like we were at somebody else's mercy, and that somebody else being the Colombian government, we felt like it took a long time.
Yeah, and
to get us...
because truly we were at their mercy. It was like if they decided to close offices for a day, then that was another day of us waiting to get all this paperwork finalized and to have all of the paperwork done so that we could come back to the United States. And so that's why you're in country for a month, is that it takes time for them to finalize the adoption. There's a whole week. So the day that he joined us, November 17th, there was a week there, and this sounds strange, but it's almost like a trial week.
Yeah.
And truly that's what it is. They want a week to happen with you and the child to see if, like, is this going to work for your family?
Yeah, like, is he good? Are we good?
Right.
Is it happening?
And families can get to that end of that week and say, like, no, this is not for us. And again, I'm going to reiterate that is not a bad thing. It is good to be really realistic about whether or not you are ready to adopt that child for their sake and for your family's sake. But anyway, so we got through that week. We as hard as it was, like, it wasn't really even that challenging. Like, for us, it wasn't so much like, what was not hard was not Eithan joining our family. It was us just ready to be, like, coming back home.
To be a family of 4 together at our own home.
Right. Gearing up for the holidays. Like, we went through Thanksgiving while we were down there, and it was just a bizarre Thanksgiving experience. Like, we didn't, at that point, our moms had left, and so it was just the 4 of us.
And we were in
a different part of the country, not in Bogota anymore, a smaller city, which is where the courthouse is, for them to finalize. And it just was different. Like, it was like eating spaghetti on Thanksgiving for dinner, and, like, Luke had gotten sick and had all kinds of stomach problems. He swallowed water at the swimming pool that was not properly treated. So he was, like, on the struggle bus, and it was just exhausting. Like, that, towards the end of that, like, second week is when we really started to be like, oh man, like, we need to start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Finally, the finalization went through, and once that takes place, then you start, like, the immigration paperwork process. A lot of that is, like, preloaded on the front end, but, like, you still have to wait for, like, the U.S. Embassy to finish things. We have to wait to get Ethan's passport, which he has a Colombian passport, because it is truly, like, him immigrating to the United States. Like, he's being able to immigrate to the United States because he's being adopted by our family, but there's a, like, legal process.
Immigration process.
Yeah. And it is not easy. It is so complicated, and thankfully we had an agency that helped make it easier for us. But had we had to have done that just on our own, there's no, like, I don't know how you would even begin to do that process. So anyways, so we made it through. We got Ethan's paperwork to be able to travel to the United States. We flew home.
Well, and that was a mad dash because we found out, well, the Colombian government was going to close for Christmas and New Year's.
Right.
And so we knew we had a hard date that we needed.
It was very stressful.
Mentally to get out and get home before the holidays, or we were going to be there after New Year's.
Right. Because
so
they
like,
shut down for, like, a couple weeks during that period.
So we were stressed, and we were like, we're ready. So we got the call that it was going to be time. So Nick had to take, like, a taxi to the embassy, I think, to get a bunch of paperwork. Me, who spoke very little Spanish, had to take both of the boys, walk down the street to a tent to get COVID tested, because we could not get on a plane until we had COVID test.
Travel without COVID test.
So I had to call, like, a social worker and put her on speakerphone on Spanish and, like, have her communicate with the lady that's going to stick the swab up our nose. It was like a whole thing.
I had to rush from the embassy to go get swabbed in order to get my COVID test, because we had to have those COVID tests, because, like, at that time you had to have them, like, 2 days before you traveled or something like that, like, within 2 days. We also, like, had medical appointments during that time. Eithan had to get, like, some vaccinations while we were down
blood
there.
Work and some,
super traumatizing. Like, I had to hold Eithan down. Yeah, you got to skip that one. Francie stayed back at the apartment with Luke. Ethan, who I had just been with me for a couple of weeks at that point, had to hold him down in order for him to, like, have blood drawn, and he was screaming his head off. It was just the worst. But again, it was a mad dash. We were scrambling. We got everything in order, and then we were able to travel home like mid-December. It was like the beginning of December. And it was almost 1 month that we had been in Colombia. But we got home, got to the airport. We flew from Bogota to Atlanta, stopped in Atlanta, and our first meal in the States was at a Chick-fil-A.
Ethan's first meal was at the Atlanta airport, and he had Chick-fil-A, which, I mean, I feel...
He chowed down, nice. For sure. But then we went from Atlanta to to Orlando, and our friends had made signs and T-shirts and were there to welcome us, and it was just so special and so like such a like sense of relief. Like it was emotional being home for sure. And then we came home, and they had come into our house before they picked us up from the airport and turned on all of our Christmas lights and put on Christmas music. And when we walked into the front door, I'll Be Home for Christmas by Michael Bublé was playing. And both of us just like started weeping. We were just like, oh, it feels so good to be here.
Yeah.
And I just remember sitting on the couch that night, like once we got the boys to bed, like knowing that Eithan was in his room, feeling this like sense of fullness in our home of like, this is how this home is supposed to feel. Like this is such a good thing. Like we're a family unit now, and we feel good. So that is in some ways crash course on the adoptive process, and that doesn't like go through all of the details. We'll dig more into like our time in country in another episode maybe in the future, but that's an overview. If you guys have more questions, feel free to always message me. I know some of you guys had questions because you yourself are starting the process. Always feel free to reach out on the Theme Park Dad on Instagram, and I'm more than happy to like respond and have conversations about that. But we are blessed. We are so thankful for our little Eithan. He is such a wonderful little boy. He's absolutely like the son that we needed for sure for like when our family grew the way that it did. So, that being said, we're gonna go celebrate him at Magic Kingdom, and we gotta go because friends are here. Friends that were at the airport to help pick us up are here to go celebrate together. So we're gonna hop off. But thank you guys so much for tracking with us. We appreciate you always, and that's it.
Bye.
If you have, like I said, questions about adoption, feel free to reach out. Love you all.
Bye.